The massive chamber of the Galactic Council buzzed with excitement. Thousands of alien representatives from across the galaxy sat in curved rows that reached toward the distant ceiling. Today was special. They would welcome or reject humanity's request to join their interstellar community. Ambassador James Miller stood alone at the speaking platform, his gray diplomatic suit stark against the colorful robes of the alien council members. He felt small, but he kept his head high. Earth was counting on him. Honorable Council, Miller began, his voice steady. On behalf of Earth and humanity, I thank you for this audience. We come seeking peaceful trade and cooperation with all species. A holographic display flickered to life behind him, showing Earth's small fleet of 27 warships. Immediate whispers and barely contained laughter spread through the chamber. Miller's face remained neutral, though his jaw tightened slightly. Admiral Voss, the Council's military advisor, stood up. His scaled skin gleamed under the chamber lights, and his 4 eyes narrowed as he studied the display. "This is your entire defensive fleet?" he asked, not bothering to hide his amusement. "It is," Miller replied simply. 27 ships to protect your entire solar system." Admiral Voss shook his head. "For comparison, the smallest member of our council maintains at least 500 warships. The larger powers command fleets of thousands." More laughter echoed through the chamber. Miller noticed several representatives pointing at the display and making what he assumed were jokes to their neighbors. Council Speaker Thorne, a tall being with crystalline features, raised a hand for silence. "Ambassador Miller," he said, his voice carrying a musical note that did nothing to hide his condescension, "surely you understand our concern. How can we accept a species that cannot properly defend itself? The galaxy is vast and not always friendly." Miller stepped forward. "With respect, Speaker Thorne, size isn't everything. Our ship's air—" Yes, Admiral Voss interrupted. "I'm sure they're very special." This brought another wave of laughter. "But let's be practical. That tiny fleet couldn't even defend against a minor pirate raid, let alone stand against any real military force." The ambassador's patience remained intact, but his blue eyes hardened. "If the Council would allow me to explain our defensive capabilities." "I've seen enough," Admiral Voss declared. He turned to address the Council directly. "As military advisor, I must recommend against accepting Earth into the Council at this time. They clearly lack the basic military infrastructure to be a contributing member. Perhaps in a few centuries, when they've developed proper fleet strength." Miller watched as heads nodded throughout the chamber. He had expected some resistance, but this level of dismissal was concerning. Just then, a junior aide rushed into the chamber and handed a datapad to Admiral Voss. The Admiral's 4 eyes widened as he read, and his scales shifted to a paler shade. "Speaker Thorne," Voss said, his voice notably less confident, "we've just received reports of 3 merchant vessels going missing in Sector 7, near the human territory." All eyes turned to Miller. "Are you implying something, Admiral?" Miller asked quietly. "Missing ships near your space, shortly after you petitioned to join the Council." Voss's scales now showed traces of anger. Rather convenient timing. Miller's expression darkened. "Earth had nothing to do with these disappearances. In fact, our patrol ships have detected unusual energy signatures in that sector. We would be happy to share our data. More likely your tiny fleet is compensating for its size through piracy," a voice called from the assembly. "If you would review our sensor data," Miller tried again, "you might find." "This audience is concluded," Speaker Thorne announced. "The Council will deliberate on Earth's petition, but given these developments, I wouldn't be optimistic, Ambassador Miller." As the chamber began to empty, Miller stood his ground at the platform. He watched Admiral Voss and Speaker Thorne in quiet conversation, occasionally glancing his way with obvious disdain. "You're making a mistake," Miller said, though only to himself. "Those missing ships, something's coming. Something worse than pirates." He looked once more at the displayed image of Earth's fleet. small in number, but hiding capabilities these arrogant aliens couldn't imagine. As he left the chamber, Miller activated his secure communicator. "Commander Taylor, they reacted exactly as you predicted. Implement Protocol Cassandra. I fear we'll need those ships battle-ready sooner than we hoped." The pieces were in motion. Humanity had tried to warn them. Soon, the galaxy would learn why Earth's fleet didn't need to be big to be deadly. Commander Anna Taylor stood at the window of Earth's space station, watchtower, staring at the distant stars. The latest report in her hand made her frown deepen. 5 more merchant ships had vanished in the past week, bringing the total to 8. "Display attack pattern analysis," she ordered. The window transformed into a holographic map, showing red dots where ships had disappeared. Her sharp eyes noticed something the Council had missed. The attacks formed a clear pattern, like a noose slowly tightening. "Commander." Lieutenant Reed burst into the room. "Council ships are approaching our border. They're demanding to search our space for the missing vessels." Taylor's lips pressed into a thin line. "How many ships?" 50, ma'am. All heavy cruisers." "Such a waste of firepower," Taylor muttered. She knew those huge council ships were more for show than actual combat. "Open a channel to their commander." The holographic screen flickered, showing Admiral Voss's scaled face. "Commander Taylor," he said coldly, "surrender your pirates, or we will search your territory by force." Taylor remained calm. "Admiral, we both know Earth isn't behind these attacks. Our data shows." "Your data?" Voss laughed. "From your tiny fleet of outdated ships." "These attacks follow a pattern," Taylor continued, ignoring the insult. "Look at the progression." She transmitted the analysis to his ship. "Whatever's doing this is moving inward, using the attacked ship's resources to grow stronger. This isn't piracy. It's hunting behavior." "Nonsense." Voss dismissed her concerns without even glancing at the data. "This is clearly the work of primitive pirates trying to appear more threatening than they are, much like Earth itself." Taylor's patience wore thin. "Admiral, these attacks bear similarities to historical records from the Orion sector's collapse 50 years ago." "We believe." "The Orion sector," Voss interrupted. "That was a natural disaster. Your attempt to connect it to these simple pirate raids shows how desperate you are to avoid blame." Just then, Taylor's screen lit up with urgent signals. "Admiral," she said sharply, "our sensors are detecting multiple ships dropping out of hyperspace near your position. They don't match any known signatures." "More of your tricks," Voss sneered. "Our superior sensors detect nothing." His image suddenly filled with static. Taylor watched in horror as dark shapes emerged behind the Council fleet. They moved like hungry predators, their hulls seeming to absorb light itself. "Battle stations," Taylor ordered. "Wake up the Thunderchild. Get me Captain Reynolds on the line." She grabbed her command tablet, fingers flying over the controls. "And someone get me Ambassador Miller." The Council ships, caught completely off guard, began to scatter. Their massive size made them slow to maneuver, perfect targets for the swift, dark attackers. Energy beams lanced out, but instead of destroying the Council ships, they began draining them. "Power vampires," Taylor whispered, "just like the Orion records described." She watched as the Council ships' lights flickered and died, their crews trapped inside. Ambassador Miller's face appeared on her screen. "Report, Commander." "It's happening, sir. The swarm is here, and they just caught the Council with their pants down." Taylor brought up the tactical display. "Their ships are being disabled and drained. Standard Council weapons are having no effect. And our countermeasures. Ready to deploy, but..." Taylor hesitated. "If we reveal our true capabilities now, there's no going back. The Council will know everything we've been hiding." Miller's face was grim. "Better to be mocked as primitives than watch good people die. How many ships can you get there in time?" Taylor checked the deployment screen. "Just 3. The Thunderchild and 2 escorts. 3 ships against an unknown number of swarm vessels." Miller shook his head. The Council will never let us hear the end of this. 3 ships are all we need, Taylor said firmly. She opened a channel to Captain Reynolds on the Thunderchild. Captain, you have permission to remove all restrictions. Show them what a human ship can really do. As she gave the order, Taylor watched the small dots representing Earth's ships move toward the battle. The Council had laughed at their size, never understanding that humanity had learned long ago that bigger wasn't always better. The real question was, would they still be laughing when they saw what these tiny ships could do? Captain Reynolds stood on the bridge of the Thunderchild, watching as his small force of 3 ships approached the battle zone. Ahead, the massive Council warships drifted powerless, their lights dark as the swarm vessels continued to drain them. "Status report," he ordered, his voice steady despite the tension. 15 Council ships completely drained, sir, his sensor officer reported. 20 more under attack. We count 32 swarm vessels, all bigger than us. Reynolds nodded. The swarm ships were huge black shapes that seemed to eat light itself. Each one was 3 times the size of the Thunderchild. To the Council observers who still had power, this must have looked like suicide. 3 tiny human ships charging into certain death. "Time to show them why size doesn't matter," Reynolds said. "Disengage power limiters. Wake up the ship." The bridge lights dimmed for a moment, then blazed with new intensity. Hidden panels across the Thunderchild's hull slid open, revealing advanced weapon systems that had been concealed beneath a facade of primitive technology. "All hands," Reynolds announced shipwide. "This is what we trained for. Activate combat protocols." The Thunderchild's primitive hull began to transform. Layers of nanomaterial shifted and changed, turning the seemingly simple warship into something that made the watching Council crews gasp. "Sir," the comm officer called out. "Admiral Voss is hailing us from his crippled flagship." "On screen," Reynolds ordered. Voss's scaled face appeared, lit only by emergency lighting. "What trickery is this?" he demanded. "Your ships, they're changing." "No time to explain," Reynolds replied. "The swarm is your real enemy. They destroyed the Orion sector 50 years ago, and now they're here. We tried to warn you." A swarm ship noticed them and turned, its energy-draining beam lancing out toward the Thunderchild. This was the moment that would have meant death for a normal ship. "Shields at full," Reynolds commanded. "Show them what human engineering can do." The drain beam struck the Thunderchild's shields and bounced back. The swarm ship reeled as its own weapon was reflected, its dark hull crackling with unwanted energy. "That's impossible," Voss shouted through the comm. "No shield can reflect energy weapons. Adaptive quantum shielding," Reynolds explained as his ship charged forward. "Something we developed after studying old records of the swarm. Tell your ships to power down completely. You're just feeding them energy to use against us." The Thunderchild's escorts split off, their own true forms revealed. They weren't the simple patrol boats they'd appeared to be, but highly advanced warships in miniature. Each one carried enough firepower to match a Council dreadnought. "Multiple swarm ships approaching," the tactical officer reported. "They're changing formation. They recognize us as a threat." Reynolds smiled grimly. "They should. Launch disruption drones." Hundreds of tiny points of light erupted from the human ships, swarming around the larger swarm vessels. Where they touched, the swarm's energy-absorbing hull began to fail. "Their weakness is their strength," Reynolds explained to the watching boss. "They depend on absorbing energy. Our drones overload their systems with more than they can handle." The battle that followed was unlike anything the Council had ever seen. The 3 human ships danced between the massive swarm vessels, their superior maneuverability making size meaningless. Wherever a swarm ship tried to drain energy, it found its attack reflected back. Wherever they tried to run, the disruption drones followed. "Sir," the sensor officer called out, "swarm ships are beginning to retreat." Reynolds watched as the dark ships began to pull back, leaving their damaged companions behind. In less than 30 minutes, 3 tiny human ships had done what the Council's mighty fleet could not. They'd driven off the swarm. "Report to surviving Council ships," he ordered. "Prepare for emergency power transfer. We're not letting anyone die out here today." As the Thunderchild moved to help the stranded Council vessels, Reynolds noticed Voss staring at him through the still-open comm channel. The Admiral's expression had changed from contempt to something like awe. "Still think we need a bigger fleet, Admiral?" Reynolds asked quietly. Voss could only shake his head, watching as the human ships he mocked began saving his crews one by one. The galaxy's balance of power had just shifted, and everyone knew it. The tiny fleet wasn't so tiny anymore. In the massive Council observation chamber, Admiral Voss stood silently as technicians prepared the holographic display. Around him, hundreds of Council military leaders had gathered to witness something unprecedented, a detailed examination of human warship technology. The Thunderchild floated as a hologram in the center of the room, its true form now fully visible to all. Gone was the simple, primitive shell that had fooled them for so long. In its place hung the masterpiece of engineering that made even the most advanced Council ships look outdated. Ambassador Miller walked to the center of the chamber, standing beside Captain Reynolds. The mocking smiles that had greeted him weeks ago were notably absent. "As you can see," Miller began, "we had our reasons for keeping our true capabilities hidden. The swarm has a habit of adapting to known weapons. Surprise was our best advantage." "Impossible," one Council engineer burst out. "A ship that small cannot contain such advanced systems." Reynolds touched a control, and the hologram expanded, showing the Thunderchild's internal structure. "Size was never the problem," he explained. "You built bigger ships because you could. We built smaller ships because we had to." The display zoomed in on the ship's hull. "Quantum-compressed materials," Reynolds continued. "Every cubic meter of our hull contains the equivalent of 10 cubic meters of conventional material. We didn't need huge ships. We learned to make more space inside the space we had." Admiral Voss stepped forward, his scales now a respectful shade of blue. "The adaptive shielding. How?" Miller nodded to Reynolds, who brought up a new display showing the shield system. "Traditional shields try to block energy," Reynolds explained. "Ours learned from it. The first hit from any weapon teaches our shields its pattern. The second hit gets reflected. The third hit gets absorbed and converted to power for our own weapons." Murmurs of disbelief filled the chamber. "But the transformation," another Council member called out. "Your ships changed shape during battle." "Programmable matter," Miller said simply. "Every part of our ships can adapt to the situation. Hull plating becomes weapons. Weapons become sensors. Sensors become shields. Why build 1,000 specialized ships when one ship can become whatever you need?" The hologram showed the Thunderchild's transformation sequence. Smooth plates rippled and flowed. Weapons emerged and retracted, the entire ship shifting like liquid metal. "Your ships are alive?" someone asked in awe. "No," Reynolds corrected. "They're just very, very smart. Each ship has a quantum AI core that makes billions of tactical decisions per second. When you saw our ships dance between the swarm vessels, that wasn't just human pilots. It was human and machine working as one." Admiral Voss raised all 4 hands for silence. "Why reveal this now? Why not keep these advantages secret?" Miller's face grew serious. "Because the swarm attack wasn't random. Our intelligence suggests they're gathering for something bigger. Much bigger. We'll need to work together to survive what's coming." The hologram changed to show the disruption drones that had helped defeat the swarm. "These were just prototypes," Reynolds explained. "Imagine what we could do if we combined human innovation with Council resources." "The Council has always believed in strength through size," Miller added. "We believe in strength through adaptation. Your ships are powerful, but they're static. They can't change. They can't learn. Against an enemy like the swarm, that's a fatal weakness." Reynolds brought up one final display, a simulation showing Council ships retrofitted with human technology. The massive dreadnoughts transformed from vulnerable targets into adaptive battleships. "We're not asking you to scrap your fleets," Miller said. "We're offering to help you make them better. The question is, can you set aside your pride and work with the species you once mocked?" Admiral Voss looked around the chamber at his fellow council members. The recent battle had shaken their confidence in traditional military doctrine. The human ships had proved that innovation trumped size, that adaptability beat brute force. "Perhaps," Voss said slowly, "it is time for the council to learn some new tricks." Miller smiled. "Good, because the swarm will be back, and next time, they'll be ready for what they saw today." He gestured to the hologram of the Thunderchild. "Fortunately, this isn't even our latest model." The chamber erupted in excited discussion. The tiny fleet wasn't just powerful, it was revolutionary, and for the first time in council history, size had stopped mattering more than intelligence. The emergency alarms blared throughout the council's capital world, Centura. In orbit, over 2,000 council ships formed a defensive line against the approaching swarm fleet. Behind them, the gleaming city towers of Centura stretched toward the stars, home to billions of citizens from across the galaxy. Commander Taylor stood on the bridge of the Thunderchild, studying the tactical display with Captain Reynolds. The swarm fleet numbered over 5,000 ships, more than had ever been seen in one place. "They're not even trying to hide now," Reynolds said grimly. "This is their big push." "Status of Council fleet?" Taylor asked. "Still refusing to power down their ships." Reynolds shook his head. "Pride is going to get them killed." The massive council ships hung in space, their energy weapons charged and ready. Despite the recent technology sharing, most council captains had refused the human modifications, trusting in their traditional tactics of overwhelming firepower. "Admiral Voss is hailing us," the comm officer reported. Voss appeared on screen, his scales a pale gray with worry. "Commander Taylor, the council fleet is ready to engage." "Admiral, please," Taylor urged. "Order your ships to power down. You're just giving them what they want." "And look weak?" Voss gestured to the approaching enemy. "We outnumber their forward units. If we strike first." "Look," Reynolds pointed to the display. The first wave of swarm ships hit the council line. Energy beams lanced out from the council dreadnoughts, massive weapons that could shatter moons. The swarm ships didn't even try to dodge. Instead, they absorbed every shot, growing stronger with each blast. "All human ships, execute Pattern Delta," Taylor ordered. The Earth fleet, now grown to 50 vessels, broke formation and scattered. Each ship shimmered as it activated its adaptive camouflage, becoming nearly invisible. The Council fleet's attacks grew desperate as their weapons proved useless. Swarm ships latched onto the larger vessels, draining them dry. One by one, the mighty Council dreadnoughts went dark. "Council casualties at 30%, Reynolds reported. "Their formation is breaking." Taylor opened a general channel. "This is Commander Taylor to all Council ships. Power down now. Let us handle the forward units." Finally, Voss gave the order. The remaining Council ships shut down their weapons and engines, becoming dark spots in space. At that moment, the human fleet struck. Thunderchild led the charge, its hull morphing to reveal new weapon configurations. Disruption beams sliced through the swarm's energy-absorbing shields. Quantum torpedoes phased through their outer hulls before detonating inside. Each human ship moved like a dancer, too fast and unpredictable for the larger enemies to catch. "They're responding," Reynolds warned. "Swarm ships are adapting to our weapons." "Then we adapt faster," Taylor replied. "Execute Protocol Chimera." The human ships began to change again, but differently this time. Parts of their hulls broke off, forming smaller attack craft. Each piece was autonomous, controlled by quantum AI, turning 50 ships into thousands of smaller threats. "Impossible," Voss watched in awe. "Your ships can split apart." "Modular combat systems," Taylor explained as she coordinated the attack. Why have one big target when you can have 100 small ones? The tide began to turn. The swarm, designed to fight large energy-rich targets, couldn't adapt to thousands of tiny attackers that kept changing their weapons and tactics. For every counter they developed, the human ships had 3 new strategies ready. Swarm fleet is pulling back from the Council ships, Reynolds reported. They're focusing everything on us now. Good, Taylor smiled, because we're not actually 50 ships anymore. She opened a channel to the powered-down Council fleet. Admiral Voss, remember those modifications you refused? We made them anyway. Your ships are equipped with emergency quantum cores. Authorization code, Phoenix Rising. Across the battlefield, the darkened Council ships suddenly came alive again, but not with their old systems. Each massive vessel began to transform, quantum technology spreading through their hulls like a virus, turning them into hybrid warships combining Council power with human adaptability. Now, Taylor commanded, show them what our fleets can do together. The battle that followed would be written into legend. The day the tiny fleet taught the galaxy that true strength wasn't about size. It was about being clever enough to change. The Council's main war room buzzed with activity. Holograms filled the air, showing fleet movements and battle reports from across the galaxy. At the center of it all stood Commander Taylor and Admiral Voss, working together over a strategic display. The swarm is changing tactics. Taylor pointed to several red markers. They're splitting into smaller groups, trying to overwhelm individual sectors. Like an infection spreading through the galaxy, Voss agreed. His scales had taken on the deep blue of respect as he studied the human commander's analysis. They learned from their defeat at Centaura. No more massive fleets. The doors slid open, and Captain Reynolds entered with Ambassador Miller. They carried new data crystals from Earth. The latest upgrades are ready, Reynolds announced. We can begin modifying the next wave of Council ships immediately. Around them, Council engineers worked alongside human technicians. On massive screens, they could see hundreds of Council warships in orbital docks, undergoing transformation. The once rigid vessels now rippled with quantum technology, their hulls becoming as adaptable as their human counterparts. Show me the combat data from yesterday's engagement, Voss requested. A hologram appeared, showing a brief but intense battle. 3 modified Council cruisers, a quarter of their original size, but twice as lethal, danced around a swarm attack group. They moved with the same fluid grace as human ships, their weapons constantly changing to counter swarm adaptations. Your crews are learning fast, Taylor noted with approval. They should, Voss replied. We've had the best teachers. He paused, his 4 eyes showing a hint of amusement, though some are still having trouble accepting that they fight better in smaller ships. Miller stepped forward. Speaking of which, the new hybrid designs are ready for review. The central hologram changed, showing a revolutionary new class of vessel. It combined the best of both worlds, Council power cores and human adaptive systems, all compressed into a ship smaller than traditional Council frigates. Beautiful, Voss whispered. How soon can we begin construction? The first batch is already underway, Reynolds said. But that's not the best part. He pressed a control, and the hologram split into dozens of smaller ships. Like our vessels, each one can divide into autonomous units. One ship becomes a fleet. The swarm won't expect that, Taylor added. They think they've adapted to our current capabilities. This will change everything again. A junior officer rushed in with a priority message. Commander, Admiral, we're detecting new swarm activity in the outer rim. They've changed their ships. The tactical display updated, showing the latest swarm vessels. They had abandoned their massive energy-draining forms. Now they too were smaller, faster, trying to mimic human tactics. They're copying us, Voss observed. Taylor smiled. No, Admiral. They're copying what we showed them. They still don't understand the most important part of human design philosophy. Which is? Voss asked. Never show your best work until you have to. She nodded to Reynolds, who activated a secure channel to Earth. Central Command. This is Commander Taylor. Authorization to deploy Mark VI prototypes. Code. Evolution's Edge. The room fell silent as new data flowed in. Even Miller looked surprised. The ships we've been using, Taylor explained, are 3 generations behind our latest designs. We kept them in reserve, knowing the swarm would eventually adapt. The hologram showed a new class of ship that made even the hybrid designs look primitive. It was smaller still, but the energy readings were off the charts. By copying our older technology, Reynolds continued, the swarm has locked themselves into an evolutionary dead end. They think they know how we think, how we fight. They're wrong. Voss studied the specifications with growing amazement. These capabilities, they violate half the laws of physics we know. No, Miller corrected gently. They violate the laws of physics, you know. Humanity had to think differently to survive. Now we'll teach you to do the same. Around them, the war room erupted in activity as orders went out across the galaxy. The combined fleet was about to evolve again, proving that the greatest strength wasn't in size or power, but in the ability to change when change was needed. The tiny fleet that had once been mocked was now leading the greatest military revolution in galactic history. And they were just getting started. The final battle began in the darkness between stars. The combined Human Council fleet faced the largest swarm concentration ever detected. But this time, both sides looked very different from their first encounter. The swarm had abandoned their massive ships entirely, fielding thousands of smaller vessels that mimicked older human designs. They thought they had evolved. They were wrong. Commander Taylor stood on the Thunderchild's bridge, now the command center for the entire Allied fleet. Beside her, Admiral Voss watched the tactical display with calm confidence. The Council's remaining ships had all been upgraded with human technology, each one a fraction of its original size, but many times more powerful. All ships report ready, Reynolds announced from his station. Mark VI prototypes are in position. Taylor nodded. Send the signal. Across the battlefield, dozens of tiny ships suddenly appeared. Each was smaller than a Council shuttle, but their energy signatures made the sensors scream. These were humanity's true masterpieces, hidden away until this moment. Beautiful, aren't they? Miller said softly from his observer position. Small enough to slip through any defense, powerful enough to reshape reality itself. The swarm attacked first, their copied human tactics obvious and predictable. Their ships moved in complex patterns, expecting the Allies to respond as they had in previous battles. Now, Taylor ordered, show them what real human ingenuity looks like. The Mark VI ships began to move, but not as ships had ever moved before. They didn't fly through space. They folded it, appearing and disappearing faster than thought. The laws of physics seemed more like polite suggestions around them. Quantum displacement drives, Reynolds explained to the amazed Council observers. Why travel through space when you can simply relocate its contents? The swarm ships, for the first time, showed confusion. Their adapted tactics were useless against an enemy that didn't actually move through space. Before they could develop countermeasures, the Mark VIs struck. Deploy the gravity lances, Taylor commanded. Beams of concentrated gravitational force lanced out from the tiny human ships. Where they struck, space itself compressed. Swarm vessels were crushed into points smaller than atoms, their energy-absorbing technology useless against weapons that didn't use energy at all. All ships, execute Protocol Omega. Taylor's voice carried across the fleet. Show them everything. The combined fleet began to change. Council ships split into smaller units, each one executing maneuvers that would have been impossible months ago. Human vessels phased between dimensions, striking from angles that shouldn't exist. The Mark VIs continued their gravity attacks, herding the swarm into a killing zone. They're trying to retreat, Voss reported, his scales bright with excitement. Not this time, Taylor said firmly. Captain Reynolds, activate the quantum cage. The Mark VII ships moved into a precise formation. Reality rippled between them as they generated a field that trapped the swarm fleet in a bubble of altered spacetime. Admiral Voss, Taylor turned to her ally. "Would you like to give the final order?" Voss stood proudly. "All ships, final attack pattern. Show them why they should never have mocked humanity's fleet." The battle that followed was brief but spectacular. Caught in the quantum cage, the swarm could only watch as their stolen tactics proved worthless against true human innovation. When the last enemy ship vanished into a gravitational singularity, silence fell across the battlefield. Hours later, in the Council's Grand Chamber, things had come full circle. Ambassador Miller once again stood at the speaking platform, but this time, there was no laughter. "Humanity," the Council speaker announced, "has proved itself beyond any doubt. We were wrong to mock your fleet, wrong to dismiss your warnings, wrong to think size meant strength. We learned from our mistakes," Miller replied diplomatically. "Now we hope to help the galaxy learn as well." Admiral Voss stepped forward. "The Council hereby recognizes Earth as a founding member of the new Galactic Defense Force. Your methods, your technology, your philosophy, they will guide us into the future." As applause filled the chamber, Commander Taylor and Captain Reynolds stood at the back, watching. "Quite a change from our first visit," Reynolds noted. Taylor smiled. "Sometimes the smallest things make the biggest differences." Through the chamber's windows, they could see the combined fleet in orbit. Large council ships flew in formation with tiny human vessels, all of them transformed by the power of innovation and adaptation. The tiny fleet had started a revolution, changing not just how the galaxy fought, but how it thought. And somewhere out there, the next challenge waited. But this time, they would face it together. Size, after all, had never mattered as much as the intelligence to change and the courage to be different.